Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of the Never Ending Climb Convergent Labs edition. This week, our fearless leader, Sean, is on a world tour, visiting multiple different countries, keeping Convergent IS very, very busy. So for today's portion of the conversation, Brahm, our newest director of Convergent Labs, and myself will be speaking specifically on intake and orchestration, a very popular and emerging market. Brahm, nice to have you back on.
Hey, nice to see you again. It's been a while, or it feels as if it's been a while, but
Yeah, at least for the pod, but I mean, we're talking just about every day and weekends as usual. So Brahm, overall, I think a big thing and a big topic of discussion is intake. Everyone's talking about intake management. Here at Convergent, we seem to be very hyper-focused on the orchestration piece. So I want to just talk, amongst us two on how we perceive the market today. So what is intake management to you?
I mean, intake management is, I think you've said it like a zillion times, it's nothing new in the end, right? It's streamlining the input that end users, the requests that users basically have. And it's something that we've been doing for a long time. I mean, in Ariba, we had sorting requests. In the end, if you think about a purchase requisition, that's also a purchase request. That's also kind of like an intake. The only challenge or the only problem or challenge, I think, with intake was that it used to be very structured. You basically, we gave you a form and that was it, and you were able to fill that in and you would get the data out of it. But the problem is that that form doesn't always contain all the information that is needed. So I think, the whole concept of intake is that we try to get, a better set of data when it comes to, what users are actually requesting instead of, those 10, standard fields that everybody's basically asking. So giving you the flexibility to ask whatever you want so that the user that is actually processing the request or the system that is processing the request also has all the information needed. And again, not just those 10 or 15 standard fields that everybody's asking for or that everybody's providing in the end. So I think that is, in my opinion, what intake is. And of course, the intake piece, it is important because that is the data set that drives an entire process. It's a set of fields and that basically drives the entire process. And as I mentioned, with a standardized set of fields, you're not able to just, cover all the requirements that a customer has, not even like, you're not going to be able to basically drive an entire process with that in the end. So I think that is in the end what the market is now looking at on how to streamline that intake process and how to make it more flexible as well.
Yeah, perfect. So like when I look at the enterprise tech market and how things have evolved, in the 90s and early 2000s, it was the best of suite. All the big companies in the enterprise tech world had a suite of solutions that did everything your business needed, whether it was SAP, whether it was Oracle, Ariba when it was its own entity and not acquired by SAP, right? They had the procurement suite down. And then everything went SaaS crazy, right? And everyone built all of these innovative niche tools on pure SaaS solutions that started picking apart at those suites. So now, right, everyone has a salad of different software solutions. And you have these perpetual novice users that we call them the perpetual novice. They go into a system once to 10 times a year to just create a request. Do you see, this oversaturation of SaaS tools and different logins for end users being the primary issue why intake is becoming such a hot topic today? And how do you see the market attacking this huge problem of an oversaturation of cloud solutions?
Yeah, it's definitely a problem. I mean, when I was doing like 15, 16 years ago, when I was doing these, SRM implementations, we didn't really have that problem. I mean, most of the customers that I had back in the day, they were running everything on SAP, and everything was basically in the SAP UI. And I mean, intake, as I mentioned, it was already there, but for the end user, they kind of like knew where they had to go to because they had that single unified, user interface in SAP and the old enterprise portal. Of course, not all of them, but most of the customers that I worked with, at least. So for them, it was easy. They went to, SAP's enterprise portal, and from there they could, start purchasing stuff. They could, file HR requests. They could, anything could be done from that single portal. And as you mentioned, in the end now, that's a bit of a different story. Yes, we have these portals as well, and with SAP's Fiori Launchpad, and there's definitely others out there as well. But the challenge is indeed that, a lot of these solutions are not on SAP anymore, and they're outside of SAP, and they're not really harmonized from a user experience perspective neither. I don't think like single sign-on is a big issue. I mean, any big, enterprise software provider can do single sign-on in the end, but it's really harmonizing that end-to-end process, and that all starts from, again, the intake. So I do think that the intake plays a very crucial role in that part. But in the end, it's not just the intake piece. It's also, once that intake is completed, once that form is submitted, how do you then, orchestrate that workflow through different systems and through different, manual steps, manual approval steps, completion steps, whatever that is, but also into the systems in the end. That is in the end, I think, the whole business or the whole orchestration layer that we do see appearing now as well, that is becoming a very important topic. And in orchestration is, again, nothing new. We had, orchestration layers before, but they were really focused on integration, on really, integrating documents from point A to point B. But this is not purely integration in the end. This is end user experience, end user orchestration, or whatever you want to call it. It's really guiding that end user through the process, that they know, like, okay, this is the request that I now created. Like, where is that request? Like 2 weeks later, where am I? Which system do I need to go to look it up? I think that is the piece that is currently still missing, and that is going to play a very big role, or an important role in the near future.
Yeah. I would say overall, from our perspective, and obviously offline, we've had a lot of these discussions. Companies that are just focusing on intake management, their overall goal is basically a form and an API call, and then they kind of wash their hands of anything else after that. That is a not a holistic view of how to run a business, and is going to lead you to a dead end many, many times, because that API call goes to one system, or in some cases maybe an email inbox or something like that, and then they don't touch anything after that. So that is definitely why we've put so much emphasis on orchestration. And getting into the orchestration piece, one very interesting light bulb moment that I had through conversations with you and Sean and what Convergent's been working on is, everyone talks about workflows, and it is a different definition depending on who you speak to, and usually it's two different definitions. To the typical business user, a workflow is an approval, review and edit step, or I just need to click a check mark on a to-do list.
It's a manual intervention in the end, like somebody's doing something manually.
Yep. But to the technical brain, like yourself, I mean, you play both sides, but on the technical side, a workflow is something much deeper and much more complex. Could you explain a little bit what the technical side of it is, and then how we perceive bringing both of those worlds together?
I mean, yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, a workflow from a technical perspective, if you think about the word workflow, it's basically just a number of activities, that are being executed in a sequential order, or maybe in parallel, or they may be branching out as well. But it's, I would say, tiny, and these activities are tiny, isolated components that have a specific purpose. They do something, and, but that is, of course, an isolated piece. On its own, it doesn't really do anything, but as part of a larger workflow, it does do something in the end. So from a technical perspective, that's how I see it. So it's a bunch of activities are executed in a sequential order. Each activity basically is, as I mentioned, an isolated component with a specific logic that it's executing. And it's not, like I said, it's not doing something on its own, but as part of the larger workflow, it's basically tasked, to run a sequence of steps to with a specific input to get it to a specific output. That's in the end what it does. And what's really important from a technical aspect, is, if you have 10 different steps that you want to execute, and, step number 4, step number 5 fails, then what? What do you do? Like, do you start over again? Do you continue retrying, till that step succeeds and then continue, or what do you do? So that mechanism is truly, important, and that is also kind of like, and this is now maybe becoming a little bit too technical, but that's also what we basically see, from a microservice-based architecture. When you build cloud-native solutions, you try to decouple, a monolith into multiple reusable components that are completely isolated from one another. And there we have pretty much the same problem or challenge. If you need to run something, if you need to do something, that might touch multiple of these microservices. But what do you do if it fails in the second or the third microservice? Like, what happens to your process? What happens to your workflow? And as I mentioned, do you restart it again? Do you retry? And it's what we use. We refer to that as the saga pattern. And there's a whole bunch of ways to basically overcome that. But that's pretty much the way that I see it from a technical perspective, what a workflow is. Mm-hmm. And that also kind of like, relates to a functional workflow. I mean, for me, a functional workflow is an end-to-end process. It's, the whole hire to retire process, or the procure to pay process, where each step that you do in that process, each document that you create, each approval step that you do is an activity, is this isolated, component that runs on its own. And, on its own, it doesn't really do anything. But if you, put them in the right sequence, then you end up with that end-to-end process. And that end-to-end process is, of course, different for any customer. I mean, SAP, they set the ground, and they basically set the baseline for what, for example, procure to pay is. But if you look at a procure to pay process at customer A versus customer B, they're pretty much aligned, but there are always, differences in there. And that is important. That is, how do you handle those differences? And definitely when those differences are, different systems in the end. What if the entire procure to pay process is not sitting in the SAP system, but, touches SAP and other systems there as well? That is what, again, kind of like relates back to the whole orchestration layer. That's why you need some kind of workflow orchestration layer there, from a technical perspective, but that also handles all the functionalities from a functional process in the end. And that is in the end, the I would say a very important component for the coming years.
So if I could summarize what you just said there, the technical aspect of it follows a specific set of rules to complete the process end to end on a technical piece. End to end, and usually kind of behind the scenes, a little bit automated, very little manual intervention. Yep. The technical piece runs on this, ideally, this microservice-based architecture versus this massive monolith, meaning you have all these little components that if one goes down, the other 4 out of the 5 are still running the show and can still handle the business process, even though one, part of that is down. So it's like a
specific component.
Yeah, and it's like a company, right? You have the finance, the operations, the services, and although one, let's say the lights go out and the electricity goes out for the finance floor, operations and services and management, all of that is still running, to try to bring it to a type of context.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah,
exactly. And then to bring it, so then to the next element of it, there's the manual task that handle a process end to end. I need to create a contract. I need to review it. I need to negotiate it. I need to approve it. Manual. But in today's world, everyone owns 8 different software solutions that don't talk to each other. So what we're saying from an orchestration perspective is we're going to bring all of that together, and we're going to have a rules engine built into this orchestration layer that weaves manual and automated tasks in and out of different systems and through different people to complete that end-to-end process in one process flow, as opposed to having such a fragmented process in different areas and things getting lost.
Exactly. And these are, and that's also, I would say, a very important piece of it, is that you could already imagine that these workflows, if we don't call them like that, or process orchestration flows, or whatever we want to call them,
we have really something special that we'll be calling them come Spend Connect in Vegas, but we'll keep that one in our back pocket.
These are long running in the end. That is an important thing, right? They're not like, you don't run them they don't run for 2 minutes or 2 days. They run for a long period of time in the end, and that's a very important piece.
And that's what differentiates orchestration from intake, right? Where we're saying intake is just a form in an API call. That's a very short workflow, and that's that technical piece that we're talking about.
Starting point. It's a starting point. It starts your workflow. It's a trigger to start a workflow, and it's an important piece because it captures all the data that you need to run the workflow. Because there's a lot of information on that intake form that can basically decide, okay, based on this piece of information, the workflow will go this path, or based on this piece of information, it will go that path. There's branches, there's a whole bunch of logic in that workflow. But what's really important, in my opinion, is that once you submit that request in the intake, for you, it's not done neither. For you as a requester, it's not completed neither. You want to see where you are in that workflow. Definitely, if we're talking about workflows that last for a couple of days or weeks or months, you want to see, like, I'm waking up at 9 a.m. I'm looking at my tool, like, where am I in that process?
Yeah.
What's going on? When is my invoice getting paid, or when is my leave request getting approved, or something like that? You want to get the insights there as well. So it is important that the intake is there for sure. It captures the information that drives the process, that drives the orchestration layer. But you also want to get the insights then as an end user to see where you are in that process.
Yeah. So if I'm just a typical perpetual novice, like we talk about, a typical casual user, I just want to go in, submit it, and see it sent to the system. But there is a whole nother business process that's getting left out there if you're not really focusing on the orchestration engine. And that's the beauty of these long running workflows, where you can focus on the life cycle of a contract, the life cycle of a vendor, the life cycle of a customer, the life cycle of a product. All these different areas with these long running workflows really ensure that you have a resilient and durable business function, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So, we talked about a lot of really cool stuff here. I think something that there's all this stuff and confusion that's coming up around orchestration. Is it ETL? Is it iPaaS? Is it RPA? And, what I think is the easiest way to convey it from my perspective is, well, yes, a function of that is RPA. A function of that is integration suite. A function of that is functional workflows and approvals and all of that. And then obviously everyone wants to know about AI and where that comes in. Yes, that is also a function. These are all cogs of the greater wheel that is our orchestration engine.
Yeah.
What is your perception on this? Because obviously the market is still defining itself, and I think a lot of people are trying to figure out what exactly orchestration is. Can you just give your definition of what it means?
A little bit of everything in the end, as you mentioned. It's a little bit of ETL, it's a little bit of integration, it's a little bit of this, it's a little bit of that. That's maybe also a bit of a downside. It needs to be a little bit of everything to be able to do whatever you want to do, because for me, it's basically pretty much aligned. The functional side, the functional meaning of, for me, a workflow or an orchestration process, or an end-to-end process, or whatever you want to call that. For me, from a functional perspective, it's an end-to-end process. Yeah. How do we run an end-to-end process from the intake, which could be, look, I have a demand, for example, if you want to stick to the procurement world, I have a demand to buy something, or I have a demand to repair something, or I don't know what, up until the process that the vendor is paid in the end. And in that middle, there's vendor selection, there's, ordering that needs to be done. There's a whole bunch of activities that needs to be executed. And for me, that is in the end the orchestration piece. Is, like I mentioned, all these different activities that are being executed in a specific order, which can be, different based on whatever information is fed into the system or fed into the workflow. But basically executing those different steps and not looking at, what each and every step is doing, or in which system something is doing. It shouldn't matter in the end, and it should be able to, cover everything. It should be able to create, documents in an SAP system, in a non-SAP system. It should be able to call APIs, governmental APIs. It should be able to do all of that in the end. But it's really, executing those steps end to end in a sequential order, and not really looking at the underlying infrastructure or underlying systems that there are, and also giving you the capability to make changes to that through the course of its lifespan in the end, because we know customers are working in one specific system in that year, but maybe the next year they're switching to something else. That end-to-end process doesn't really change for them. It might improve, it might be a little bit more automated, that is something that we should be able to reflect as well in the process that we set up in the system. Maybe setting up a process, with I don't know, 10 manual activities and 5 automated activities, and then moving to a process where we could switch that, and saying like, okay, now we have 5 manual activities and 10 automated. That enhancement that you do, or enhancement is really a wrong word in the end, that change that you want to do through the course of a couple of months or years is something that you should be able to reflect in the system. So it's really, I think that's an important piece, that we are able to model the end-to-end process of a customer, and independent of whatever process that is, it doesn't have to be just procurement, it can be anything, to model that in the system, and also to give that its own life, to change over time, to change the course of it, to change how branching is being done, for example. You might say on Monday morning, if that specific data element is entered into the workflow, then it goes into that branch, but maybe on Tuesday it will go a different branch, that you can also kind of easily make changes to your business process, enhance it based on the outcomes. So.
Yeah. And like, right now, a very big topic in the United States is there's a strike going on the whole East Coast and down in the Gulf. This is for all of our customers and everyone in our industry. Everyone has eyes on this, because this is one of those, panic, big, serious moments, and you need a very resilient and very intelligent solution to be able to handle these kinds of events. In our lifetime and in our careers, we've seen this happen a few times, obviously, 4 years ago with COVID. So you need these type of workflows to prepare for changes, drastic changes, and you need to be prepared to do it immediately. So, this is where the orchestration layer comes in for a type of logistics continuum and focus. Fantastic, Bram. To wrap this up, I loved what you were talking about, and it really brings everything full circle in that last piece about how we are kind of bringing back the suite, but not, in the traditional sense, how it was in the 90s. More so, this orchestration layer sits on top of all these tools that you already own and all these manual processes. And you have that concept of a suite again, where your end-to-end business processes can be handled through technically one system or one orchestration layer, weaving in and out of all of your respective systems. So that's where we're at, today. To conclude, where do you see this orchestration engine and market going tomorrow?
I mean, today it's still fairly new. So what I do think is going to be important is that these process flows, as I mentioned, are currently today, they have to be modeled in the system. So you, as an admin, you go in the system and you model those business processes, and you can make changes to it, as I mentioned, over the course of time. That's all fine. But what I do see in the near future is that some of these process flows might change automatically or autonomously, that based on certain market conditions or based on certain events that are being picked up, that these are being modified, to handle the changes in, what's happening in the market. So first of all, I mean, the automatic creation of some of these process flows, and this is mainly for, I would say, maybe an implementation perspective, when you embark on a big transformation project, and having the capability to build out, and I hate the words best practice templates, but building out best practice process flows from scratch via maybe NLP or LLMs. That is something that I do see happening in the very near future, because we're pretty close to that already. But then, of course, at some point in time, I would say these processes can also adjust themselves. Of course, there's always a supervision layer on top of it, so there's always going to be an end user monitoring that. But having the capability to have these process flows changed automatically, again, like I mentioned, based on certain market conditions, is something that I do think will be possible in the I don't know, years or maybe decade to come, or something like that.
So I'm not technical like you. I don't live in the code. I wish I did. Are you saying here I now have the capability to do some of these complex integrations and mappings and routings myself in the future, at least?
In the future, I mean, for now, I would say you can do the mappings yourself, right? So now you could set up, I have an SAP Ariba system here. I can, plug that into my existing workflow. So maybe I don't have that today, but tomorrow I'm implementing that. So we just kind of like drag in a Reba box into the stream and do the mapping myself. That's something that we can do already, and that's kind of like part of the orchestration layer. But in the near future, like you said, the mapping could be done automatically. Indeed, why do we still need to do a mapping? The system knows the input because, in the workflow, all these activities have an input and an output. Everything is typed, so we know exactly what the input is. We know exactly what the output is. Why, don't we allow the engine to do the mapping themselves? Or why don't we allow the engine to maybe add that box itself, or maybe remove the box itself at some point in time, or maybe change, the course of the, the branches, the course of the workflow by itself. Today, it's still pretty much configured as part of the workflow, where you say, look, I'm, based on maybe an input field on the form, I'm branching out the workflow and going into a different step, having these if then else conditions. But maybe in the future, the workflow engine will decide on its own, like, oh yeah, even though you entered this particular value in that field, technically the workflow should go to the left. But based on the information that I have, based on the events that I picked up, I'm actually moving it to the right. That's something that we can see happening in the near future, and that could have an impact, of course, a positive impact on the outcome there.
Wow. Well, I am very excited. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the brain of Brahm and some of the things that we're building over in the Convergent Labs arena or lab itself, then we would love to continue this discussion October 15th and 16th at Spend Connect in Las Vegas. We will have a booth and we will be demoing our orchestration tool, which we will be launching in the next week. If you're not going to be at Spend Connect in Las Vegas, please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or via email. We really, really look forward to speaking with you all more. Brahm, thanks so much. I think we should start calling this Inside the Brain of Brahm.
I'm not sure if that's a good idea, but yeah, why not?
Awesome. Well, appreciate you. Thanks so much. You've been doing incredible things. Your whole career, but most especially since joining us. And we look forward to chatting next time.
Thanks.
Take care.